Our senses, interacting with the world around us, allow our consciousness to express itself through our brain by processing information. But this consciousness that is specific to us and that we all share does not come from nowhere, it is not innate. There is no brain existing in this material world that can think, elaborate and build our own brain. There is no plan or process thought out, conceived and analyzed by a physical intelligence, which, if it were the case, would not be able to explain its own existence and would only push the question back. It is the story of the egg or the chicken. The DNA code is only a production tool, an assembly line, and does not contain the information of the processes necessary for the completion of organs like our brain. Therefore, it is clear that there is an immaterial, timeless and transcendent higher consciousness, the original primary consciousness, the one that gives life and elaborates the development process of the embryo until the formation of the organs and the human body, like a conductor. It is a pure consciousness, which has no object, which is external to itself. It is a consciousness which can be the receptacle of all that will happen to the secondary consciousness, which is our own consciousness, which we experience and which personalizes us. It is this primary consciousness that gives birth to ours, that gives birth to life. The close association of light with God is not a new concept from a religious or spiritual perspective. God is light is a recurring theme in the Bible. Genesis says that, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. This is very close, though not quite the same, as saying, "I will be the light." In fact, according to some Bible verses, God said more explicitly that He is indeed the light. Photons, also called quanta of light, do not know time. From the point of view of a photon, time does not exist. It is emitted and could exist for hundreds of millions of years, but for the photon there is no time between the moment it is emitted and the moment it is absorbed again. It does not know distance either. Like God, light is timeless, omnipresent and inseparable. This is confirmed by the Young-Slit physics experiment, which consists in making two beams of light from the same source interfere with each other, by making them pass through two small holes drilled in an opaque plane. This experiment then allows to highlight the wave nature of light. It was also carried out with matter, such as electrons, neutrons, atoms, molecules, with which we also observe interferences. This illustrates the wave-particle duality. The interferences show that the matter has a wave behavior, but the way they are detected by the impacts on a screen shows their particle behavior. In quantum physics, a particle depends on the fact that it is observed or not. It behaves as a particle if it is observed, otherwise as a wave, although it is in reality both at the same time. In the end, doesn't the human being act in the same way when he is observed? Our two eyes are our tools of observation of the material world, and thus observe the corpuscular behavior of the matter. But, when we close our eyes, another eye comes into action. It is our third eye, which is our pineal gland, and which allows us by its production of the hormone melatonin, to be able to dream and to see the immaterial world, undulatory, like light. Consequently, and paradoxically, it is by closing our eyes that we can observe the light, and it is in this optimal way that our connection to God is exercised. It is in this way that the religious, during the prayer, Buddhist monks or other shamans, enters in trance for their connection to the divine. The name of the pineal gland comes from its pine cone shape. It is said that the pine cone was venerated by the ancient pagans as the fruit or seed of the coneflowers, a symbol related to the ideas of eternal life. It was also considered a phallic symbol for its shape and its role in the creation of life. The pine cone is a symbol found in many ancient civilizations and cultures around the world. The pine cone, and thus the pineal gland, represents the seed of life. However, the seeds are generally planted in the earth, and will give the evergreen tree, that is the conifer. We can therefore see that, for human beings, the seed is at the top and not at the root. In reality, this is only due to our point of view. The pineal gland is actually located at the root. When the human being is not yet born, during the pregnancy, the baby grows with its head downwards, and therefore its pineal gland is well located at the bottom, at the root. During this period, the baby is still directly connected to the divine, because his vision of the world we live in is impossible, and only his third eye allows him to perceive the light. At birth, the baby turns over, and its frontal eyes open for an awakening to the world, made up of matter. Matter becoming visible by our eyes by its macroscopic corpuscular behavior. We can thus consider the human being after his birth as an inverted tree. This is why we celebrate Christmas every year with a famous Christmas tree. The history of the Christmas tree goes back to the dawn of time. Its most distant origins have been identified in a large number of customs, rites, traditions, myths, and legends. The very first origins of the Christmas tree go back to antiquity, with evergreen trees, and in particular conifers. They were associated with the renewal of nature, and therefore with rebirth. Hence the analogy with the baby and Jesus for Christians. We all know that the winter solstice in the north is the shortest day of the year. From the astronomical point of view, winter begins. On the exact day of the solstice, the hours of daylight are at their shortest, and the hours of night are at their longest. From the next day, the days will start to get longer. It is understandable why, since ancient times, this particular time of the year was loaded with symbolic meanings. It is the rebirth of light over darkness, the renewal of the cycle of seasons, which in a broader sense becomes the cycle of life. It is the transition from the triumph of darkness, given by the solstice, immediately submerged by the rebirth of the sun that, from this day, and always in a more obvious form, takes over the days and the world. An analemma is the figure traced in the sky by the different positions of the sun, taken at the same time, and from the same place, during a calendar year. This cycle of the sun forming the shape of the number 8. The ancients considered that the sun was really dead at the winter solstice. In fact, it would stay still for 3 days without moving north or south. Then, on the third day, it would start moving north again. It is this astronomical phenomenon that is associated with the birth of Jesus, on December 24th, 3 days after the winter solstice in the north. In ancient pagan Rome, December 25th was dedicated to the festival called the birthday of the unconquered sun, or Saturnalia. It was not until the mid-4th century Christian era that the date was adopted by Christianity to celebrate the birth of Jesus, the Son of Righteousness. Christianity originated from older religious traditions that worshiped nature on earth and celestial objects. But it is not only the sun that is associated with Jesus, the moon also has its own analemma, monthly this time, describing, likewise, the number 8 over a period of 29 days and a half. A new moon occurs once a month, triggering a new cycle of light, a rebirth. When the moon is new, it is invisible to us on earth, then it slowly appears as a very thin crescent of light. A new moon lasts about 3 days before and after the lunation. So we have 3 days of apparent immobility of the sun, at the winter solstice, and 3 days of invisibility of the moon, at the new moon, which gives the number 33. This corresponds symbolically to the death of Jesus at the age of 33 years. The solar and lunar analemmas, thus, form 2 8s or 88, describing the cosmic clock. The word Jesus is the Latin form of the Greek Jesus. So it is not surprising that the value in gematria of the word Jesus is equal to 88. The celestial vault is made up of 88 official constellations. If observed throughout the year, the constellations move progressively westward, describing an annual solar cycle. The Big Dipper is one of the most recognizable shapes in the night sky. Ancient people used groups of stars like the Big Dipper to describe the seasons of the year and to navigate. They used it as a calendar to follow the seasons and cycles. Indeed, the Big Bear moves in a circle during the solar year around Polaris, the North Star, which is the only star that does not move and is used to measure the latitude. The Great Bear makes a complete circle, 360 degrees, around Polaris, in about 23 hours and 56 minutes. In 24 hours, the Big Dipper actually travels more than one full circle, or 361 degrees. This means that, if you look at the same time each night, the Big Dipper will appear just a little lower in the northwestern night sky, and thus, will make an apparent complete circle after 1 year, a kind of circular analemma. By shifting its position according to the season, this cycle forms the swastika, an ancestral symbol in different cultures and religions of the world. If you were asked to find a symbol of evil, you would most likely think of the swastika, the emblem by excellence of the Nazi regime's Third Reich, which always evokes hatred and fear. And yet, not so long ago, it was a symbol of blessing and good fortune. Even its name is derived from Sanskrit roots meaning that which is good. Having said this, and we will come back to the symbol of the swastika, we must first recall that the winter solstice of December 21st, 3 days before the birth of Jesus, corresponds to the minimum length of daylight in the north, particularly in Europe, where Christianity has spread. We must also remember the analogy of our world to our human body. The world is fractal, and everything that exists on our scale, also exists on the scale of our world. The world is identical to our human body in all its details, as much in its constitution as in its physiology. From then on, Europe corresponds to the head, including the brain. Italy, where Christianism was born in the Roman Empire, and Germany, expansion of the Roman Germanic Empire, represent the brain stem. The whole represents Jesus himself, whose head corresponds to the pineal gland, the seat of human life and consciousness. We will come back to this analogy with the rest of the world in more detail later. During the celebration of the birth of Jesus, that is to say Christmas, Jesus is placed at the foot of the tree, in the crib, because he is the seed of the tree. The crib thus corresponds to the brain, and consequently to Europe. We see that, since the fir tree represents the human body, by analogy, it also represents our world. So the world and its geographical representation, as we know it, is also an inverted fir tree. We can verify this original shape of the Earth, closer to reality, by comparing the distances between two opposite points in the north, then in the south, as well as their respective flight times and time differences. If we take the distance between San Francisco and Vladivostok, in its greatest distance, we get about 20,000 kilometers. Of course, on a globe, the minimum distance between these two cities would be 8,300 kilometers. However, no flight really exists covering this distance and whose flight would thus last between 8 and 9 hours. Only the flights on the great distance of 20,000 kilometers exist, and of duration of approximately 20 hours. The time difference between San Francisco and Vladivostok is 18 hours. So, in summary, 18 hours of time difference for 20 hours of flight. In the south, between Papeete, Tahiti and Wellington, the distance is 4,300 kilometers, with a flight time of 5 hours 30 minutes. On a globe, this would indeed be the shortest possible distance passing through the daylight saving line. But in reality, it is the minimum distance through South America and Africa. The time difference between Papeete and Wellington is 23 hours. So, in summary, 23 hours of time difference for 5 hours and 30 minutes of flight. What we need to understand here is that the further north we go, the more the time zones grow in distance, like an expansion of those, and conversely, the further south we go. We can therefore see that, indeed, the time zones and the Earth itself form an inverted triangle, which corresponds well to the shape of an inverted tree. The tree always has a star at the top, representing the divine light. Here, in our model of the inverted tree, the light is somewhere beyond the Antarctica. This light is also the place where all the time zones meet, which means that all the hours, minutes, and seconds are in the same place at the same time. Therefore, it is a point where time is no longer relevant. It is the point of junction between the infinite and the definite, the immaterial and the material, the divine and the human. It is probably for this reason that we are forbidden to go beyond the 60th parallel. It should be noted that, in the theory of the Big Bang is only a four-dimensional transposition of our real world. Moreover, the graphic representations of the Big Bang look strangely like a Christmas tree, with the Big Bang itself as a star at its top. According to the analogy of our world to the human body, India, known as the cradle of humanity, obviously represents the womb, because it is where life begins. Moreover, the very shape of India is comparable to the shape of a womb, which is connected to the outer light. Some geologists have even found evidence to support the hypothesis that the Indian subcontinent was part of Antarctica a billion years ago. Of course, this is purely symbolic because the theory of continental drift is a pure invention. In short, our world is identical to our human body, which is nothing but an inverted fir tree. The world composed of matter, which is our earth, and stemming from the immaterial, is a feminine entity giving birth to humanity and its civilization, whose base is Jesus, the seed of life. We define it as our mother nature. But the human, like the world, also has its immaterial, spiritual aspect. Therefore there is also the immaterial representation of the fir tree, whose top is the Polaris star, the only fixed star in the sky. This invisible immaterial tree has its base, which is always Jesus, either the brainstem or Central Europe, and rises to the heavens to its top, the Polaris star. It is not so surprising that, in the Nazi regime, it was common to represent the swastika at the top of the Christmas tree. The swastika being, let us recall it, the position of the Big Bear according to the seasons, within the center of rotation, the star Polaris. The Nazi Germany represented a failure of the pineal gland, from a symptomatic point of view, which translates into an overproduction of the unique hormone melatonin, secreted by the pineal gland. By analogy, the single hormone in excess represented the single Nazi party, also in excess. Hence also the Great Torch March in Berlin in 1939, the torch representing the pineal gland. This hormone allows dreaming, and therefore access to the immaterial and the divine, hence the quest of the Nazis towards spirituality, or towards India and the origin of man. In short, our world, like the man and the inverted tree, includes both aspects, material and spiritual. In reality, the world, the human being and the tree, are one and the same, and are only different representations of the same divine creation. We also know that the divine and all its creation is defined as the Alpha and Omega, the first and last letter of the Greek alphabet, designating the all, the beginning and the end. Other than this symbolic aspect, there is also a much more practical reason for this definition. The sun and the moon do revolve around the earth, but on an axis perpendicular or almost perpendicular to the flat surface of the earth. Indeed, if we take a view of the top of the earth, triangular in shape like the fir tree, we see that its shape is also the letter A or alpha in Greek. The bar in the middle of the letter A corresponds to the projection of the course of the two stars, the moon and the sun at the equinoxes or equator. That is to say, when their course is exactly perpendicular to the surface of the earth. Moreover, it is in the center of the letter A, on its central bar, that the pyramids of Giza were built, the geographic center of the world. NASA reveals it here on the logo of the Apollo mission. In the same way, if we take a side view of the Earth from its summit, thus from Antarctica, we will see an almost circular path of the two stars, with a long period above the Earth and a short period below. The diameter of the circle of the course of the two stars is smaller than the maximum width of the Earth in the north, that is to say at its base. This configuration gives us the letter omega. The Moon and the Sun travel annually and monthly, their respective analemma, similar to the number 8, with a smaller part that corresponds to the one between the equator and the top of the Earth, Antarctica. But, let's go back to Europe and its analogy with Jesus. We know that Italy and Germany represent the brain stem, the core of Europe. Germany is the torso, with the pineal gland or head of Jesus at the top. The head of Jesus is always represented with a halo surrounding it, a ring of light. The pineal gland or Germany is associated with the moon, which cannot exist without the sun, represented by the pituitary gland, which is under the pineal gland, and corresponds geographically to France. The pituitary gland, or France, is therefore associated with the sun, hence the King of France who was called the Sun King. Or again, the period of French history called the Century of Lights. France corresponds to the ring of light surrounding the head of Jesus. The pituitary gland or sun and the pineal gland or moon are inseparable and complementary, and allow the existence of Jesus and his radiation. Most of the prayers are done with the head downwards or towards the sky, which corresponds in our brain to the vertical alignment of the pineal and pituitary glands, and thus by analogy to the lunar or solar eclipses. It is therefore not surprising that the destruction of France, nowadays, corresponds to the destruction of the pituitary gland, or sun. It is this gland which acts directly or indirectly on the pineal gland, the moon, or, by analogy, which illuminates the head of Jesus. This leads to the weakening of Jesus, the destruction of the churches, the darkening and annihilation of the brain, of the pineal gland, of spirituality, and of our way of connecting to the divine, to the immaterial. Another important detail of this world, and not the least, is that the pituitary gland is composed of two parts. The front part, the most important, corresponds to France, while the back part corresponds to Poland. In the 16th century, King Henry III was both King of France and King of Poland. The posterior lobe of the pituitary gland stores and releases the antidiuretic hormone vasopressin, which helps to regulate the water balance of your body. However, in recent years, Poland is facing the drying up of its rivers. It is clear that there are two opposite suns at 180 degrees orbiting our world, which explains the possibility of sunshine in the extreme east and west, at the same time. Finally, although all this remains to be confirmed, God has endowed us with our eyes, and especially with the third one, to see the material and immaterial complexity of our world. God is great, omnipresent and omnipotent, and we must have faith in him.